I'd ask you to consider this axiom to be self-evidently true. I'm joking. But my pitch to the City Council for the last 2 years might as well have been that. Okay? I'll tell you what it means, because actually I think it's quite... unfortunately, the pen's not very good. And I've totally changed my talk, by the way, because everything that's come before has changed the way I was thinking about things. So M here stands for mission. A, analytics, D, data. So this means the intersection between mission and analytics of data. Okay, that's what that stands for here. Union with place, P for place, leads to transformation. Okay, and that's what I've been telling people for the last 2 years, and I've basically been saying, and this is self-evidently true, right? And you know, you're talking to local politicians, local governments, stuff like that, and they kind of look at you like you've just landed from outer space. But I just kept saying it over and over again, not like that, but I think I'm going to start doing it like that. So I think what I'm going to try and do today, and axioms are kind of like this, right? I don't know if you're not mathematical, this probably means nothing, but axioms are things you have to just accept and then get on with life on the basis of that. And that's what I'm trying to persuade the City of Exeter to be true. If you don't know, the mission of Exeter City Futures is to somehow make Exeter a sustainable city, energy independent and congestion free in 10 years. Actually 8 now, because I've spent 2 years pitching that. All right, I'm going to talk you through a few projects and examples of stuff that's been going on in Exeter, exclusively in Exeter. And I'm hoping that after I've talked you through all of these things, brilliant, thanks, more pens. After I've talked you through all these things, they won't make this equation self-evidently true, but if you squint at what I'm saying, this may come into perspective, and I will keep referring to it. This is set language, by the way. It's great, isn't it? Right, the first thing I'm going to talk about is, well, I mean, first of all, actually, I did do some pictures, but and also the city of Exeter is at a kind of a turning point, and it can be like this, or like, you know, that's Copenhagen, people cycling around, having a nice time, no traffic. This is Brisbane, people getting to work on boats on the river. That's one really exciting, interesting place to be. Or it could end up like this. And at the end of the day, the things that drive these sorts of things are actually outside of the reach and the control of ordinary people. Usually it's sort of in the realms of things like planning processes and stuff like that. So what I'm going to say is that this equation, I think, can be used to control which of these outcomes we get in Exeter. And indeed, I think, in any city. Right, now, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk you through some examples. There aren't really any slides for it. I'll leave it on this picture for the moment. I'm going to talk you through some examples which will hopefully help you understand. And at the end, what it is really it's a call to action for all of you. And they're also in increasing order of scale/stupidity as well. So the first project started because I had a tour of a thing called an MIRV. It's a recycling centre, mechanical recycling centre in Exeter. And we went and had a look around it, and I learned a few things. First thing I learned actually was that recycling rates in Exeter are really bad. About 40% of recyclable materials in Exeter actually get recycled. So I learned that, and also I learned that there was a lot of data in this recycling centre, a really interesting place, because when the vans go out, the trucks go out, every time they collect something from a bin, the truck registers it. Then the truck comes back full of all this, for me anyway, lovely data, and it gets downloaded into a spreadsheet, and that's where it sits. And I was chatting to the lady who runs the centre, a very inspiring person, really cared about rubbish, and that's the theme as we go along. Because caring about things, and you saw that earlier as well, really matters. She hadn't passed the GCSE in maths, and she just didn't know what to do with this stuff. Okay, stop, pause that thread. There's another thread. Exeter is one of only 2 places in the UK that has a maths specialist school. This is a place where if you're really geeky and you don't fit in, you can go to this maths specialist school in Exeter. So what we did was we took the data from the recycling centre, took it to the maths specialist school and said, right, kids, take a look at this, see what you can tell us. And, you know, they do things like kind of map it in GIS and do stuff in R and Python and get really clever with it. And, you know, they were able to find out all sorts of stuff about the, scheduling of collection times and et cetera, which gave some quick wins, and that was really exciting. But the next step for them is to create tools that can be taken to primary schools in Exeter. In those primary schools, next year, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be saying to those primary school kids, I want you to run marketing campaigns to your parents. And you're going to compete ward by ward with other primary schools and street by street, and the kids at the maths school are going to monitor it and help you work out who the winner is. But also, and this is the really cool thing, recycling is money. The more recycling you do, the more money you make. I hope Vicky doesn't mind me kind of giving some of the secret stats of the City Council, but 40% recycling generates about £1 million of revenue. So every 10% extra is maybe £200,000. That's great, right? Because then you can get the primary school kids to do a revenue share deal with the City Council. That would be good, wouldn't it? Okay, so that's the recycling project, and that's an example of something we are calling building capability. And it's an interface there between a mission, which is to improve recycling rates, and kids want to save the world, right? They don't want the world to drown in rubbish. Analytics and data, and anchored in a place which people care about. The transformation bit we'll come on to later. Okay, another example, another rubbish example. We've got a social accelerator in the city centre that's just run its first cohort through, and there's a company that came out of it, a really great company called Binnit. Binnit is run by someone who really does care about waste, a lady called Philippa. And what's great about Philippa is not only does she care about waste, but she also has a first-class degree in mathematics from Warwick University. So that appeals to me. So they got sponsored through the social accelerator. They were out searching through all the bins for Exeter's sole traders, trying to find out what are the issues with their waste collection, talking to the sole traders about, what are the things the problems that rubbish creates for you. And the reason we were doing this was because currently commercial waste collection in Exeter causes really quite bad traffic problems because you've got little tiny, almost Roman streets in some cases, and you've got these huge, great, £1 million, 25-ton trash lorries, and they're driving around, and they collect the stuff when they feel like it. So Exeter suffers with some quite bad rubbish problems because the traders don't have any space to keep the rubbish inside, so they put it out on the streets, and sometimes you'll see stuff outside Pret a Manger with 40 bags piled up because the guys haven't come to collect the trash. And each one of these guys has no purchasing power. So what Binnit have done is they've created a purchasing platform to create at-scale purchasing power to renegotiate contracts with the commercial waste producers. So again, it's a kind of... But what they needed to do was they needed to really understand the pain points of the waste producers, be very analytical and collect data about it, so they could position the contracts correctly. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Sparks now. Sorry, I've got to go through these things very quickly. So there'll be lots of stuff missing, I'm sure. But talk about Sparks. This is a much bigger... M for Sparks is much, much bigger. In the UK, 40% of children who take GCSE maths get less than what was a C grade. The numbers won't mean anything to you. They don't mean anything to me either. Fail as first attempt. 40% of children. 1 million children a year take GCSE maths. So that's 400,000 children fail GCSE maths every year. If they all held hands, they'd stretch from London to Leeds. That's a pretty big failure. That's a pretty big social failure. So we wanted to do something about that. Sparks wanted to do something about that. And it became a set of questions that needed to be answered, but they wanted to answer it scientifically with data. So a question they were trying to answer was, if kids do homework, does that make any difference? That seems like a reasonable question to answer. And in this day and age, when we're spending close to £50 billion a year in the UK on education, you'd expect us to be able to answer that question, but we can't. So they tried to set out to answer that question. And today, there are about 1,000 kids in Exeter who regularly do homework set by the Sparks system. So 1,000 kids a day, 35-ish weeks a year, so 35,000 hours of homework done through the Sparks system every year. What percentage of that do you think is completed? Any ideas? A number? 30%? Anyone else? 90. Who's that? Oh, yeah. It's actually 100. 100% completion. Actually, if you want to answer the question about whether homework has any effect, you have to have 100% completion, because otherwise you're open to selection bias. I won't go into that at the moment, but you have to get 100% in order to answer that question properly. How do you do that? That's interesting, isn't it? Because that's tough, right? I'll tell you very quickly how you do it. What you have to do is you have to create 50,000 unique content items that cover the whole of the maths syllabus. You have to create 2,000 one-minute videos. And then you have to create a matrix. A matrix is just a big grid. In the matrix, down this side, you have to have the students. And along the top here, you have to have an entry for every 50,000 pieces of content. And in each matrix element, you have to have a probability of success and an expected time to complete. With these two pieces of information for every single student, every single content item, you can create, algorithmically, a piece of homework which you can guarantee that student can do in 1 hour. Why is that important? Well, that's important because then you can have a zero tolerance. Then you can say, you must do your homework or you're in detention, which is what we do. I mean, it sounds a bit draconian, but that's what you have to do with kids. You have to have consequences. And actually, they enjoy it because they can do it. And we know they enjoy it because we don't put any of them in detention and they all finish it. Now, that's mission, analytics, data, in a school, in a place. You can see perhaps there where transformation comes in as well, because you've got quite large amounts of money involved. You know, it's not easy to get hold of, it's not easy to contractually engage with, because schools are kind of complicated places. But actually, even in Exeter, we spend, one school costs £10 million. Got, 5 secondary schools in Exeter, that's £50 million a year spent on educating kids. So, you can see how there are ways of tapping into cash, which kind of leads to transformation. Take it up another level, right? Earlier on I said energy independent, congestion-free. What does that mean, congestion-free? How can you imagine a congestion-free city? Well, at the moment, it's quite difficult for Exeter because its whole development is predicated on cars, as are most rural cities in the UK. You have a lot of housing estates outside of the city. So you have to start to ask yourself a question, what sort of services needs to exist in a city if we are not all just going to be driving our cars in and out of the city every day? If you want to do that, you want to ask those questions, you really need to know something about where people are going to and from. And it might surprise you to know that there are no analytically driven transportation models in the UK. So when someone decides where to put a housing estate, or decides where to put a car park, or decides where to put a Lidl, they do some transportation model, and the input data into that transportation model is the census. That's amazing, isn't it? In the day where we walk around with these devices telling people where we are all the time, they do try to do a little bit of stuff with some data from Vodafone, but Vodafone are so scared of handing that data over because they're worried about data protection, and also they're also concerned that if somebody else comes up with a good way of using it, they'll miss out, so they don't use it at all, which is extraordinary. So there isn't a model. So there's a company in Exeter, a company called City Science, and what it is doing is ground up, redeveloping all transportation models for Exeter using real input data, and that data can come from anywhere. I mean, one of the best sources of input data is things like key fobs. If you don't, that's free and it's owned by the people of Exeter. The businesses of Exeter in their building information management systems and the interaction between key fobs and your HR database tells you a lot about how people move around the city, and that's all ours. You don't have to get it off Google, you don't have to get it off Vodafone. You do have to persuade the lawyers to hand it over in a useful format, but actually we've got some great law firms here and they're all cool with it. So I've heard. So what I've done there is I've rushed through a bunch. Now that's a really big mission. It's analytics, it's data, it's in a place. How does that lead to transformation? Well, this is where it starts to get, I think, quite interesting, because so far we've talked about data and startups and analytics and businesses, things that you guys know about, right? Things that you guys do. How can that lead to transformation? Because at the end of the day, where houses get built is it's developers and it's planning processes and it's big money and it's investments and who knows how that stuff happens. Well, actually, we need to find out and we need to be very, very interested in it because it's shaping the future of our city and the future of every evolving city in the UK. Most of the reasons why housing estates are built circling cities are because you go through a thing called a viability assessment on a piece of land development, and the viability assessment basically has built into it a level of profitability for a developer, and developers know really well how to maximize this, and they will play cards like transport and say, well, you can't build it there because because you can't connect it easily to the transportation system. The transportation system can't handle it. And anyway, we don't want to build densely. We want to build our rabbit hutches that we always build. But if you can control all of the information about how services will connect people to places, you can force the hand of developers, I believe. And that's the sort of stuff that can genuinely lead to transformation. But before you can do it, because these things inevitably end up in court and barristers get involved, so you need entrepreneurial barristers. Barristers get involved. It means you need good, strong evidence of different ways of doing things, because when it comes to court, you need evidence. The evidence is the data, it's the mission, it's the startups, it's the place. So the things that you do early on in a transformation program like this are paving the way for really big conversations about how we can will into existence our own future. So it sort of comes full circle, because once you say things like, let's imagine that the next 3 or 4, 2,000 housing estates are not going to be stuck on the outskirts of a city on the motorway junction. They are instead going to be dense, vibrant, connected to the city, then we're going to need a whole bunch of different services. And that's why you see things like, Escargot riding around on their electric cargo bike. That's the beginning of a new kind of logistics model for a city. So when you order your Amazon package, it doesn't come in a DPD van that's kind of driving around all over the city, dropping things off for people. 70% of the costs of delivering a package for DPD are in the last mile, because they drive along with all their stuff in the van. When they hit the city, they go up that road, up that road, up that road, and they cover way more miles and time driving around within our city, giving us our packages, than they do coming from the logistics centre. So even they don't want to do that, but we especially don't want them doing that. But unless we come up with some alternatives, they're going to keep doing that. So, but the important thing is that those challenges, and in fact, when you start looking into what are the challenges you have to solve in order to deliver a different place for people to live, there's a long list. But the cool thing is that people will pay you to solve those problems. So that's where I'm saying where it comes full circle. By engaging with a different vision for a place, you unearth a whole bunch of challenges. We are going to have to think differently about collecting data to solve those things, but it's going to also employ us and give us things to do and help us make a living. And it's going to it makes the possibility of Exeter becoming a healthier, greener, more livable place, but crucially also a lower carbon place, for the future. Thank you.